Okay, so we're going to continue with our first ma'amar from the Pachad Yitzchok on Rosh Hashana. It's a ma'amar, just to reiterate, that it's made up of 3 chapters. We are somewhat in the middle of the second chapter, and this ma'amar, briefly, it linked some ideas together. I'm just going to run over. We said that Rosh Hashanah is characterized by a verse in Tehillim that calls it, its essential nature is bakeseh, in its hiddenness. There's something about Rosh Hashanah that's covered and hidden. We said that it's also linked to the idea of chesed. There's a verse in Nehemiah that describes that Am Yisrael were instructed to enact acts of kindness and to make mishloach manot to their brothers, that they can celebrate the day of Rosh Hashanah, that in acts of kindness that people should be able to have what to eat and celebrate the day. That is what our Misorah tells us is one of the main ways of relating to and celebrating Rosh Hashanah. We said that Rosh Hashanah in time and its status among the other Mikroi Kodesh, the other holidays, the orot, the supernal lights that shine forth on Rosh Hashanah are lights of chesed, and yet that they're the role of Rosh Hashanah in the cycle of the year is hidden, it's bakesa, compared to the other Mikrai Kodesh. Why? Because they represent the lights of creation, which are Hashem's chesed, which we described as the difference between the formative process of creation versus once creation was completed and was up and running, right? The difference between what we call hitavut, coming into being, and havaya, being itself, is the difference between Bereshit and from Vayichulu and on, and it's the difference between Rosh Hashanah and the other Mikrai Kodesh, meaning that on Rosh Hashanah something happens where there is an essential process which is hidden, which is the lights of the chesed of God that shine forth in Bereshit for the whole year that happen on Rosh Hashanah, and after that, all the lights that are manifest through the sanctity of time are already that which is. But coming into being for the rest of the year, that is a special dimension reserved for Rosh Hashanah, which is characterized by bakese, hidden. Okay, so now we talked about chesed itself, the character of chesed, and our connection to it is unique in 2 ways. We talked about how chesed is in a class above itself when it comes to all those wonderful characteristics and attributes that God expresses himself through in the world that we're meant to emulate and copy. And by copying God's midot, we are preparing our tselem elokim. And chesed is the type of characteristic that God has, which is unique. It is unique because it is more um, hidden and essential than the other acts. Meaning, if God's chesed is manifest the most in the part of creation where God was making the world in its hitavut and coming into being, and now that it is already, you don't see the chesed as much manifest as the rawest, most primal form expression of chesed is God choosing to make a world and actually fashioning it. So when we're involved in chesed, we're also fashioning our own inner world. We're creating ourselves in a way on the level where you don't do that by conforming or adopting or trying to acquire any other of God's midot. And we also said that the responsibility of making ourselves chesed-like is an engagement and a kiyum, a sustaining of God's covenant with Avraham on chesed, which is meaning that his children should continue to do acts of chesed. We're not just forming ourselves like God's chesed was used to create the world, but we are also continuing and sustaining a covenant that God had with Avram Avinu. So that's kind of a recap of what we mentioned so far. And we're going to pick up in the second chapter of Ma'amar Aleph. I believe we're on Parak He. I'm sorry, paragraph He. So we were talking about the covenant of Avram. V'zehu pesher davar brit hachesed la'Avram Avinu. This is the explanation of what the covenant of chesed, specifically of kindness, that God made with Avraham, our forebearer, our father, the paradigm of our nation. Mahuto hechratit shel Avram Avinu hu hahikir et boro. Okay, so what is the defining essence of what Avraham was able to do? Meaning everything that he achieved stemmed from an essential quality they had or an accomplishment that he had, and that is, we say that Avram Avinu recognized his creator. He represents, the whole world was able to recognize God because of Avram's accomplishments and his legacy, right? It's like the creation itself was sleeping and didn't realize that the creator was present, and Avram initiated that, right? He initiated the reestablishment of that connection. Nistakel bebira, he surveyed, he gazed upon the palace, the castle, the domain, the estate. Umitoch habira, and through, meaning creation, and through that palace, Heitzitz alav bal habira, he was able to catch a glimpse of the owner of that palace, meaning he who's meant to reside in it. By Avram Avinu really taking note of God's creation, it was inferred, or he saw the implications, and he was able to connect to God through that. That the bira was a way to connect to the Bal HaBira. Umikivan shenetiv hachesed hu, and since it was the pathway of kindness specifically, hu hanetiv, that was the path, asher alav tza'ada, that on that path was his footsteps. He walked the path of chesed in order, right? Meaning God, this is amazing, okay? Meaning, shenetiv chesed is the bria b'tavuta. How did, we said before, where do you see the greatest manifestation of God's chesed? In the world coming into being. Not once the world is, but in the world coming to being, that's where chesed alone is active. That is the theater for chesed, right? So it turns out that in Avram Avinu, recognizing the world coming into being, connecting to God's chesed of coming into being, right? Or in Avram's recognition of God, the hakav hamovil mein habore el abriya, that means that the connecting highway between God and his creation, which is the highway that we can all walk in order to connect it to, in order to connect from the creation to the creator, that is akav hachesed yikarelo. That highway, that cord, that connection of chesed is the connection in this world between this world, which is, and the creator that brought it into being. And Avram Avinu established that highway. This is beautiful and amazing. Hare mimela ata lomed. Through that, you learn ki bisha'a shehikar Avram et boro. At the moment that Avram recognized his creator, umitoch habira, and through the creation, heitzitz alav bal habir, he caught a glimpse of the creator himself. Bal karacho. You have to say, you're forced to understand, shederach netiv hachesed avar. He passed through that highway of chesed. The oto kava chesed, and that cord, that binding line between the creator and the creation, which is this kava chesed, hanimshach, that expands, that stretches forth, yashar, straight, mizecha kodsho yitbarach, from the remembrance, the holy mention of the Blessed One, el tochabriya, to within the creation, oto, that kav, that line of shining light, Avram Avinu himself passed through to get from being a member of the creation to connect to the creator himself. Bidarko, through its path, chazra mintoch habriya, he returned from within the creation, el zecha kadsho, to the creator himself.
And he's suggesting that Avram was the only human being after Adam who was able to do that?
More than that. He's just saying that he established this line. You missed this, okay? We're saying that there's a line that connects the creator and the creation. That is the line of chesed itself, because that is the line of the act of chesed, which is the midah of chesed, which is manifest, that came into being, that was activated, or that's what God fashioned or manifest when he made the world. So the world coming into being is the chesed of God, which is where you connect to God in existence. So as creation itself connected to God by Avram being part of the creation, by this line where God inserts himself into being through creation, through the act of chesed, Avram Avinu passed that. He established that, or in his recognition of Avram, he established that. However abstractly you want to conceive of this, but that living connection that God ratified by a brit, and he made that a connection, established that as a connection between the creation and the creator. That was all because of Avraham, in this act of identifying the creator through creation. Meaning, God made a creation through chesed, the creation itself connected to God back through chesed. So Avraham Avinu is now doing acts of chesed, connecting to the creator and manifesting, expressing him through this connection and through these acts of chesed.
But surely you should argue that there is a covenantal bond between creator and the creation, even before Abraham. But there is this.
I wouldn't argue that, because there's no reason to assume that. I would just be being argumentative. That's what the covenant is. What is the
You
covenant
think
of
there's
Abraham?
no brit before Abraham? There's no brit between God and the world.
There's a brit of Noach. There's the brit of Noach. That's the only brit that I know offhand. And that brit of Noach is not the brit of Chesed that God makes with his descendants, like we said, right? Al Kain, right? You don't say in Shemona Esrei, you say in Shemona Esrei that the whole right that you have to pray as a human being now, right? Adam Rishon, everything he had, he lost all of it. So whatever pieces